Welcome to the Breath of Life podcast. I'm Yulia. Here, we explore the world and our place in it through the lens of interconnectedness. If we could feel part of the living world, not just intellectually, but in our bones, if our breath could sync with the larger rhythm of life, how would that change the way we live, work, and make decisions? Join me for conversations with people who live and work from that place. Hi, a brief note before you dive into this beautiful conversation with Mark McCartney. This was recorded as a live Substack conversation, and we had some technical difficulties. You will hear those technical hiccups in a couple of places. I tried to smooth them out, but you still are going to hear them. That said, the conversation was really inspiring. Mark's perspective on silence and on life was beautiful, and I decided to keep this. I hope that you enjoyed as much as I did. Happy listening. Today I'm talking with Mark McCartney, and I'll let him introduce himself in more detail a little bit later. I'll just say Mark is coach, writer, and a host of a podcast with a name that explains the essence of the podcast. What is a good life, right? And today we're going to talk about a very interesting to me topic, and it's about silence. I we I yeah I'm just going to start with story of how I came to meet Mark and his work. And this happened at a silent conversation session. Mark has been hosting sessions. People come and people spend quite a lot of time in silence. And then really weird things happen. So I'll just leave it to you for now, Mark. So maybe can you just introduce yourself, maybe from this context?
Yeah. So my name's Mark McCartney, and I'm the holder of weird spaces. It seems. So as you mentioned, I'm a coach, writer, and a podcast host based in Berlin by way of Ireland, Dublin, Ireland. Um, Over the last few years, I started a project where I've interviewed nearly 300 people around the question of what is a good life. That's also become a book that I'm writing. It's, as you mentioned, it's a podcast. It's never with the intention of prescribing universal answers. More, I guess, revealing just that everyone has their own perspective, that it's something very personal, that it's something very evolving, continuously calibrating, and things of that nature. I've also created I've created an online course around that too, corporate workshops. But I've also set up these silent conversations that you mentioned, really because I was just quite tired of kind of top 5 lists, quick and easy solutions, so much talking, so much information, so much advice. And I get the sense that we're living in an absolute poverty of attention and listening and connection. And we're so used to repeating the same stories over and over again that we really struggle to make intimate connections with people. So I think all of these things are fundamentally human, fundamentally natural to ourselves. We just live in a culture or a society where there's very little space for that, or for genuine reflection, or time to really contemplate what you may think or feel or notice about a question, your experience, a moment, whatever it might be. So that's something that I've been very intrigued to explore. And then there's also some executive coaching I do, which really stems from the same things. I don't teach in models or give information. It's more inviting people into spaces where maybe weird and wonderful things can happen. that things that may not seem like the normal thing to say in a particular context get said, and ultimately, I suspect I'm just trying to create spaces where people reveal our humanity, our shared humanity. I think a belief of mine is we don't have to become pure or perfect. It's more, can we be sincere? And I think from that place, a lot of understanding, both collectively and individually, happens. And so all of that is a long way of saying I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going with the flow of it.
I caught myself saying weird things happened, but if you think about it, silence or other ways, I guess, of speaking without words, of being in the moment, of paying attention, of being aware what's coming up. It's not really that weird, and it feels quite important, right? But why do you think that this is not mainstream or I don't know, weird spaces? Why would people resist that or consider it not the thing to do?
Yeah, I think it's we just live in a hyper distracted world where um we've become so cut off from, I think, the way the world or nature actually works, that we struggle to just sit in the silence. We struggle to, we're so obsessed with productivity and doing things that anything that doesn't involve something happening, something explicit happening, that we struggle to just sit in the stillness of that. Um I think silence, and when you say weird things happen, I think silence is deeply revealing. And I think it brings us into contact with the very things that we're often running away from. Just a sense of noticing what's occurring within us, of how we even feel in any given moment. So, and in a culture where we are not very intimate with ourselves, I think we really struggle with that reintroduction almost to ourselves.
It does feel sometimes quite challenging to be in the silence or at least to enter silence. Once you do, though, things start really moving. And I also found that there is something very special about being silent with other people, with a group of people. Like what would that be?
So I've just noticed from my own personal life, different moments when words have not been needed. I remember a walk I actually took with my wife when we both lived in Vancouver. So we had just met in northern India. She's from Hamburg in Germany, hence I'm in Germany now. But at the time we had just moved to Vancouver. So I remember just one walk where she said, "How about we say absolutely nothing for this walk?" So we wandered around. We wandered around the seafront or the waterfront in Vancouver, and we didn't say anything for about 2 hours. And we'd maybe nod or look to certain things that we're looking at to share maybe an appreciation of the same thing, but we said nothing, and that really stayed with me. Um, Another thing that really struck me actually was in one of these interviews that I did around the question of what is a good life, where somebody commented on they were in a Zen retreat. They were sitting and facing a wall, very close to a wall. So that's all they were looking at for however many days it was, quite a few days, I imagine. And the guy who I interviewed said, while he never spoke a word to the person beside him, he felt like he knew him intimately because they'd just been in the same shared space in close proximity. And the last thing I'll say is, I remember it's happened a number of times where I've had a conversation with someone in my cafe, in my local cafe, that I've been in their presence a number of times before, but we never spoke a word. And when we finally do actually speak, there's a familiarity or there's a comfort. There's a realization in almost how free the conversation is by virtue of the fact that we spent time with each other. So I suspect what happens when we're all sat in silence together is, and this is even as you've experienced online, like I've done these both online and in person, but we become deeply aware, I think, of the interconnected nature of our being. People mentioned the sense of feeling each other's presence in the room, and we're oddly all looking at laptops in all different parts of the world. So to me, I sense that it reveals a level of connection that we just don't get to feel in our world, and I think it also reveals something around the sense of just we think we have to work for connection. I think we have to work for so many things. We have to deserve it. We have to build trust. We have to do all of these things. I suspect that the science reveals that this connection is an inherent thing and it exists already. And often, really, the words get in the way. We end up falling into traps or labels, and we just, we find like you and I could have many, many things in common that we'd agree on, but the one thing that we don't agree on, that word or that expression kind of is like a thorn in our side. And so I think in some ways words can often be an obstacle to connection that I think exists already.
The word that we were, I guess, silently contemplating in those couple of sessions that I attended, they were quite big words. I'd say probably loaded words with so many meanings for each of us. And sometimes that meaning, it didn't even suit anymore for the word. And so somehow the silence all of a sudden allowed us to connect around the word because we understood what the concept is about, but also gave some clarity to the word itself. I think something came up for me around, I think it was love, and it had to do with me going to Krumelanke and cold dipping. And now every time I come to Krumelanke to cold dip or just to swim, this moment is there as like, this is my moment of love. So it's really cool.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's really interesting that you say that just around the meaning of the word, and just even as to anyone who's listening as well, I guess the one thing I do as well is that after the initial silence, I don't get anyone to introduce themselves. So I don't know you or anyone else by the label of the job that they give them, any kind of personal information. I just get people to get to know each other from the experience that they shared. And then what's interesting is you say then about the words is that I don't know about you, but so my wife is German, and so when we first started our relationship, her English wasn't as good as it is now. And so often she'd be asking me, what does that word mean? And it could be a word that I use fairly frequently. And really, I almost don't even know. Like, it's a word that I think I use in the right context, and I've learned how to use it in the right context. But when asked to actually explain some words, I'm kind of like, I'm not entirely sure what this word means. And so it goes a bit back to this idea of even the question of why I was so intrigued to ask what sounds like such a simple question, what is a good life to so many people? I think we assume we know what that is. And yet, when we reflect on it, it takes us to a very different place than where we may have started. And as you were talking there, I think there's something so nice about the collective sense making of a word then, because it's not maybe look, of course there can be some meaning of it that's inherent and that will always be the case. But just in that moment, what does that word mean to me now? Like, and what does it mean to everyone else? And what's their interpretation doing to my interpretation of it? And it's almost this lovely kind of layering upon layering of meaning and kind of a co-creation while not really directly addressing what everyone is saying, but just adding our piece. So there's something about the process that I like of just like letting thoughts hang out with each other. I'm always making it abundantly clear in any of the sessions that I host that it's not about finding the right answer, that there's one explicit, this absolute correct answer. It's just what happens when we all just give our own fragment of meaning towards it, and what happens with the group. And I think there's not enough cases in my experience where we go in with the uncertainty of not knowing, and we don't actually look to come away with the finality. We don't look to to say that this is absolutely it. And it's more of an invitation then to just with the maybe the uncertainty, the ambiguity, and just to be in that presence together. Like so, having some sense of it, but not knowing all of it. And I don't know. It kind of reminds me of that tale by Rumi and the elephant in the dark room. And what is an elephant? And if some person's holding on to the tail, it could be this. It's like this wispy thing. Or if someone's holding on to a leg, it could be like a pillar. And I think that's kind of the way I see most of life and most relationships. We're all holding on to some fragment of maybe truth, but it's not all of it. And it's like acknowledging that or coming together that I think really interesting things happen, or even just that there's an openness of fluidity to the way that we relate, which isn't there if we just say, well, love is this, and a soul means this, or, uncertainty means this. So I don't know, there's something to it where I think I'm grateful that a lot of people that participate in them enter into it in that spirit and are open to be moved, are open to question. And yeah, the longer I sit with a word or an expression or a question in silence, I think initially it has a quick answer comes to my mind. And that's usually my conditioned response and maybe even ideas that I've inherited. But the longer I sit with that and maybe even ask myself the question, is that true? I almost think of it's like a meteor in the atmosphere and it's just layers are coming off and something is stripped down to the essence of something of what it means to me. And I think that's just a really nice place to relate to other people from, like in going through that shared process with each other.
Also, I think it's pretty important that people don't introduce themselves in any way. And it's as if who am I? Well, maybe at this session, I could be anyone. So I'm not held back by any roles or identities that I prescribe to myself. And I can just be there in this space, being held by other people who I have no clue who they are and who are in the same place. So we hold no judgment against each other. I think this is a pretty unique experience to have, sadly, nowadays.
You know, it's strange, isn't it? Like I don't know about you, but I've been since transitioning from a career in finance into what I'm doing now, maybe, initially leaving that around 6.5 years ago, and not kind of having a very clear one word answer to what do you do. Uh, I find it really interesting just how kind of containing or restraining that can be. And if I did just have a one word answer and all the judgments that we associate with labels that before we've even met the person. So, you know, if I say I'm an Irish man in my early 40s who works in such a career, who has a child, like you have so many ideas about what I am, and none of them are personal to me. Like they're just your ideas of what those words mean. And I think we have no idea the how much we limit ourselves and our capacity just to see the person in front of us, to be with the person in front of us, to really witness them. Look, we need some shortcuts with words. Obviously, I can't. Every time I sit on a chair or something, I'm not going to test it first to see if it will hold me. I trust the structure of what I consider a chair to be, and at the same time, if there's not some kind of openness or fluidity to the words that we use, we end up reducing everything to kind of just deadened labels. And for me, there's something about the act of learning who somebody is through their presence first. Just to start from there, I think can really lead us to completely different places than the usual kind of this is who I am. Because the more we pay attention to that sense of who am I, you know, I am a different person and very free, like in different moments. And I don't mean this in a sense of like a lack of authenticity. I think authenticity is more about can I be coherent about what my inner world is and my outer expression. Um, so I don't mean that it's an inauthentic thing, but just I am different as I go through the years, as I through the months in this life. I change, I am becoming. And so there's something about just that openness that I think allows us to get to meet each other more intimately.
We talked a lot bit about that before we went live, but I had a very powerful experience last night. It was called a voicing circle, a voicing ritual, and people were there to just voice. So it was not about singing, but vocalizing or creating sound with yourself, but also with others. And the 2 hours that we did that together, at the end of it, people were, wow, I've known you for ages. Like, and also I know what's important to you. And I know like we share a lot in common. We're lying on the floor with our heads touching each other, and there was this just total bliss in the room, sense of such closeness, but also holding each other in the space without judgment and all vibrating together. And I think it's just absolutely impossible to do that with words. If you think about it, silence is something that maybe makes us as humans thinks like, well, I'm better than that. Like I can think, I can talk. Again, like voicing or creating sound. This is something also quite, I guess, animalistic in nature, physiology. The things that are very dear to me is breath work and breathing together and moving together. It's also creates this very powerful sense of interconnectedness. And it's again, it's maybe a little bit too animalistic. Now I'm wondering like if you see this thread or not. Anything that distances us from the thinking capacity and maybe creates link to our animal nature. Could that be the wall between these activities?
No, this is something I've been thinking about quite recently, and I so and I'm not trying to merge the two of them too much, but as I said, a lot of my inquiries come from the same place of just paying attention and how do we connect. And so what you're saying there makes me think of a few things. So first is I remember interviewing someone once where they were just acknowledging that they feel like they just need to be held. And the fear of saying that to somebody else because that would make them feel needy. And just the idea that if we don't feel held, how we almost feel embarrassed about our human needs, like, and you can call them human, animalistic, whatever, but in nature, like parents will still tend to their children, like they'll have close touch. Like I think we find all of these things almost. We've created such a complicated world, and through the question of what is a good life or silence. I'm not trying to say that the world is easy, but I think we've created these really complicated ways to try to make ourselves happy or better that I think are the very problem or at the very root of our discontent. And it's moving away from the simplicity. Like, as you say, what if we were to just sit in silence? What if we were to hold each other? What if we were to breathe? Like, these are not very complicated responses to life. But, last week I was feeling I'd gone through a period where I just wrote so much for this book in a short burst of time of around 10 days, and I couldn't stop writing. And I just felt so worn out after the process, and I felt a little bit disconnected from life. And that's quite uncommon for me, but it was an intense period of writing as well. And my only response to that was to go for longer walks with my dog, and it was to go for afternoon naps with my daughter. And that's what like re-centered me or brought me back into some connection with something beyond or beyond that state of disconnect or feeling somewhat disconnected. I think we've made this, like, if you look at our culture and what we prioritize and the things that we seek, and almost even just how we perceive anything other than our thinking to be suboptimal or substandard almost to the capacity to think, and then look at where this culture is driving us. look where the needs that stem from this culture arise when we ignore all of our humanness, our embodiedness, our nature, our, that sense of us being an animal as well. Like, I sometimes laugh at an idea that we almost like we get embarrassed about our like our bodily functions, like, whether it's pissing, shitting, or farting or whatever. Like, we're so kind of like embarrassed by just our human functions. It's like we find it inconvenient to be reminded of what we are. And so yeah, I fully resonate with what you're saying there. I find this I really think this life is so much more easier and so much more simple than we think it is, albeit we're in a culture and a conditioning where it's so powerful and the messaging is so strong, and it's hard to just step back from it and go, actually, I don't need what it's suggesting that I need right now. Well, what I need maybe is to follow my breath. What I need is to maybe rest. What I need is to maybe have an intimate touch or to be close to somebody. And we've almost made these things out to be either too soft or not focused enough on growth. And that's a whole other topic. I think growth happens naturally, and more often than not, we get in the way of it. Like, there's a natural intelligence to this life that goes far beyond my mind's capacity to imagine. Like, having a child, no wonder is thinking, today I'm going to grow the right leg or the left leg. It's just happening without our intervention. With our collaboration, sure, with our co-creation, yes. But it's not. There's so many demonstrations of the kind of miraculous nature of life beyond our thinking capacity.
So, how do you feel into this intelligence of life?
It's just literally by paying attention, wandering around my neighborhood and paying attention to the participants in my local space. I don't view it so much as a deliberate intention to meditate now or to be silent now. I just find it's a byproduct of paying attention. And I, I personally find that the more that I become aware of my attention in the outer world, the more I become aware of the subtlety of that attention and all that's around me. There's just this very kind of comfortable feeling of belonging or connectedness to to the world around me. And when I experience that, I find that there's a incredible peace that comes with it. It doesn't extricate me from emotional responses or engagements, but it does really curtail the impact, or there's a much more fluidity to this life. Like, even my emotional states aren't something that I get hung up on. Like, I'm very blessed in my relationship with my wife. We have like we can argue, but we're not holding on to that argument. It's dealt with in the moment, and I think there's a considerable fluidity to this life, whether it's our thoughts, whether it's our emotions, whatever it might be, and that if the more we just hold in our awareness, and as I say, I don't mean in some compartmentalized version of that, like of for 30 minutes or something each day or 15 minutes. I mean, just if you really just watch what's happening in our minds, like it's incredible the speed of which things are rising and falling, and same with emotional states, same with judgments. It's not that all of these things go away from you. It's just I don't the label or the attachment to the what that says about me doesn't really seem to be that state. And so in really just holding this life in attention, I don't think it's about developing anything, losing anything, growing anything. All of that stuff, just all of that is really happening. So it's not something I necessarily have to interfere with. It seems that simple, if you get me.
Yeah. And we don't like things to be simple usually. Somehow nowadays.
No, it's weird. It's like we think it's like a sign of our intelligence to overcomplicate the hell out of everything. And I don't know if you've noticed this tendency, but I even see when experts in various fields, it could be from anything from psychology, even sports pundits talking about something. We no longer just like to say what we think in a moment. We almost just vomit up all this information and then almost say how it could be one way or the other. So we say in a very intelligent way, like, I don't know, very long winded ways of saying, I don't know. And it's almost this sign of pointing out how everything could possibly go to show some form of intelligence. But what's going to happen will happen. And, we even see this, like, I think I remember listening to a podcast, Free Comics, once, and they had this psychologist on who was saying that even, you know, the top rated people at predicting outcomes in relation to public or to foreign policy are right slightly more than they are wrong. Like it's almost 50-50. So we've created these industries and ideas around making predictions, which generally they're quite kind of they're quite futile, or they don't really yield the kind of the certainty or the predictions that we sense they would, even if someone's privy to a ton of information. So there's really strange ways in which we almost revel or take pride in how complicated we make things.
Yeah, that is very true. And maybe, which makes me think, it's from this place that we have created ourselves that this relationship to change and the fear um, of change and the fear of uncertainty comes from. Okay? Because we have so modified our relationship with change and our expectations, thinking that, well, we could probably forecast things if we think hard enough. We can predict, we can mitigate. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mark. It was a really interesting conversation. To conclude with, and what is your definition of a good life at the moment?
Uh, for me, it feels rather simple. And I said this even before my daughter arrived a couple of years ago. I'd never read any books on parenting. I just really broke it down to if I can pay attention to her, and I assume love is part of, like, inherently a part of that. And if I can be myself, and I don't mean be myself in this fixed version of myself, but if there can be inner and outer coherence. So acknowledging that whatever idea I have of myself is a changing thing, but to move with that change. So I find when I pay attention, and if I am myself in that kind of context, whatever comes from that is all I can do. And it's just essentially, I guess, trying to notice as to pay attention as much as I can, and then to notice what's going on around me. And I almost view the body then, or whatever he is that I am, the more I pay attention, the more information it has, and the better decisions it will make. Like I'm left with the idea very frequently, what could I do now that would provide a better future than pay attention to to everything that is around me right now. And when I do that, I find that my relationships improve. My sense of or willingness to experiment changes. I also notice that there's a fluidity to this life, that I feel like I'm moving with, I'm responsive to this life, and it just doesn't feel like the things that occur in this life need to be so personal, that need to be so. It doesn't need to be as dramatic, and I think as well from that, there's just a feeling of enoughness. From all these people that I've interviewed, and just even the private interviews, especially that I did 120 private interviews before I began. There's this chronic thing that's happening in our culture at the moment where we don't feel like enough, and we have to prove that we're enough, and we have to do all these things to show that we're enough. And it's only when we do those things that we can finally that feeling of being enough. And I sense the more we pay attention to things, the more the kinder I am to myself, and not in some deliberate way of, I don't know, doing exercises around gratitude, or, trying to have a positive mental attitude or something like this. It's just it's a natural sense of belonging in this world. And it's quite strange, really, when you think about it, if you're to reflect on this, like, that we don't feel like we belong. We don't feel like we belong in our bodies. We don't feel like we belong to whatever cultures and things like that. And so I think what else can I do but try to express whatever this constellation of things that I am is, and that will be changing, and that will be moving. But when I do that, the level of kind of coherence that I feel in my life, both in a sense, like internally and with my external environment, that in itself, like it won't promise me any outcomes. Like as I said at the start, like I'm figuring out plenty of things with the work that I'm doing. I've had some really interesting experiences and some nice experiences of people giving me good feedback or getting some work that makes it, helpful just to make ends meet. But there's lots that can still happen in that space for me. But in the meantime, by living life this way, it feels like a good life right now. And that's what a good life, like a good life for me is one that is happening right now. It's not one that is happening, at the end of this year when I do X, Y, or Z. And so for me, it feels quite simple from that perspective.
Mark, thank you so much for the time and for a very nice chat that also, planted a couple of insights that now I need to think through. And wishing you a good life and a good day. And let us speak more through silence.
Thank you so much for the invite and the lovely conversation. Despite any technical disturbances, it was still a delight to have this conversation.
Yes, that was an interesting experience technically. So we'll see how it goes. But going through the technology and going with the flow, that was part of it. Thank you for listening to The Breath of Life. It means a lot to me. If something in this conversation touched you, consider sharing it with someone and connecting in the process. Follow The Breath of Life for new episodes and join me on Substack, where I publish my weekly writings. The link is in the show notes. Till next time.